Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Wow, that was random.
Exceptional Radio. Hey, good afternoon. It's the 16th of January, 2022. We're in the midst of an Omicron surge. And here in Bloomington, there was like 106% increase in cases. And national averages are being broken daily, new records and all this stuff. You know, we're number one. Oh, I was wrong. It's 109.2% increase from the previous week. So this morning I woke up, my sinuses were all like on fire and I couldn't breathe and all this crap. And I had like, you know, my chest was rattling and I went and blew my nose and there was all this brown shit in it. And like, oh, fuck, what's going on? And then I went and looked at the respirator that I wore when I crawled underneath my house in the crawl space to reinforce the floor. And lo and behold, one of the seals had failed and the entire mask was full of dust. And so for like, you know, about 4 or 5 minutes this morning, I thought, man, do I got to go get one of those nasal swab things? No. Fortunately not. All I had to do was, you know, blow my nose.
Look, finding one.
Yeah, that's the other part. But all I had to do was blow my nose and you know, in the shower and then breathe in some real hot, moist air. And oh, my sinuses came back to normal. And, you know, it's incredible that there are people out there who are like walking around, you know, in shorts even. In some places there's snow on the ground, and I see imagery of people walking around in shorts and sandals, and it's like they have no idea what this kind of dry air does to their body, or they don't care because, you know, they're tough as hell or some shit.
Aren't there people out there who think that they can boost their immune system by licking rocks? I feel like I heard that somewhere.
They're drinking piss now.
Are they?
Yeah.
The yellow Kool-Aid?
Oh.
Yep.
Don't drink the yellow Kool-Aid at the rally.
Oh, man. Well, maybe if they're drinking, like, pothead urine, because it contains, like, CBDA and THCA, and those have been demonstrated to inhibit the ACE2 reception of the spike protein. So, I mean, that's a real.
Wouldn't that mean that anybody with a government job, though, would start testing positive? Like, all of a sudden, we're going to have a wave of people testing positive for THC because they're drinking the urine of people who consume cannabinoids?
You know, this is going to be a really big test of the system. If it's determined that two compounds that are commonly found in hemp and hemp product, well, in hemp naturally, something that anybody could grow and manage and, you know, fend off COVID, of whether or not this is going to be allowed. Because, you know, if it's, this is seriously like, if there was some like plant that you could grow in your yard and pull off the leaves and munch on them, a few of them every day, and not only would it provide you like a source of protein and carbohydrates and roughage, it also contains all sorts of enzymes that boost your immune system and prevent you from dying from the plague. Like, oh no, it's illegal though because cartels or some bullshit, or because they can't tax us because, you know, we would have to grow it at home.
No, it's because there's no monopoly large enough to get the right tax breaks by the cities that would host those kinds of businesses. So it doesn't fit in with the neo-feudalism structure.
It's crazy how little people are encouraged to grow their own anything. And you don't even have to own land. It's like you don't have to.
Yeah, you can use a bucket. A $5 5-gallon bucket will grow like a bucket load of potatoes. And it only has to, you only have to start with like, one potato, and you can grow a bucket load of potatoes. Also, my tomatoes, the tomatoes that we grow in my backyard, are fantastic and taste amazing. And I'm reminded of this anytime I eat a tomato that's, not grown in someone's yard or at home, because it tastes like, bland.
Yeah, a lot of shit tastes like water.
It's so easy to grow a delicious vegetable. We grew eggplant last summer successfully. Like they were smaller than the ones you get at the store, but they were full of flavor. And they weren't like, they didn't have a super tough skin. They were just small. So obviously there's some kind of industrial vegetable growth hormone out there that I don't have access to.
What do people think of a machine that creates dirt out of your food for you? I'm not sure what I think about that. Like, is it even necessary, or is it actually a fantastic idea?
Wait, is this a way to cut down on the perception of waste?
It's a way to promote composting in-house.
You're not supposed to be composting inside your house.
Yeah, that's
like that's not a smart thing. It's like an unsustainable practice.
It also produces methane.
Yeah, and it's just easier to just compost. I don't understand why tech bros and capitalism have to like reach around their head to scratch their nose and then sell it as like some novel thing. When
Wait, that's like a shit heater. You just throw your old vegetable chopping stuff that you don't eat into this thing, and it like slow cooks it for months as it turns back into dirt. Is that what? Is that like what the? That's a mechanical stomach.
It is a mechanical stomach. I think it breaks down the waste and it turns the waste into dirt for you.
So it gets hot enough to kill bacteria too. Because otherwise, we're talking about like a bacteria breeding ground. Everything about this sounds like a bad idea.
Yeah, because then it's like, where are you going to keep it in the kitchen?
Yeah.
Every time you open it up to put stuff in, like, is there a way that they can prevent bacteria from escaping? I don't know.
A machine esophagus.
It's basically like having a toilet in your kitchen. And that's where I'm like,
It's suggesting that the dirt that it makes go into your plants, your garden, your green bin, or even into the garbage.
like compost.
Yes.
They're just reinventing composting and making it less sanitary.
Okay,
And
so
selling it to us for $500.
okay, so industrial agriculture produces incredible amounts of vegetable waste that can obviously be turned into compost. And I wonder how much the home gardener, home kitchen actually can produce, and how much that compares to what agriculture produces. Because at some point you can just go buy a bag of compost from like Menards or Lowe's, and it's going to be fairly uniform in pH. It's going to have a fairly consistent composition. So it's not going to be just a bunch of random crap that deteriorated in a hot plastic box in your kitchen or backyard. Backyard makes more sense for most people. But at some point, there are like diminishing returns. So this is just some more hand waving and virtue signaling. Like, oh yeah, I'm a level 3 composter. I have a 2-stage outdoor system and a single-stage indoor system where I reclaim 45% of mineral content. And like that's some
exactly what
that's
this
some
is.
like some masturbatory bullshit. Like that person right there could probably do more for the environment by getting a better, I don't know, not using their fucking grill, not cooking with gas and switching to induction if they haven't already. I imagine they already have an electric vehicle. Well, they need to get rid of that thing and start riding a bicycle. there's maybe their home is too big and they should downsize. Those things would probably have a greater impact on the environment than home composting, which in itself produces methane and considerable amounts of waste.
Now's a perfect time to like quit meats that have alternatives as well, where you're like, that's one of the best ways for individuals to reduce their carbon footprint is to just eat less meat. And we have alternatives now where
Like
the chicken's
like, amazing.
It is. And
Holy
during a chicken shortage, this is the perfect time to switch to, like, I made some Nashville hot sauce and some Beyond Meat. I think it was Beyond, whatever it was. It don't matter which brand it was. All of the fucking chicken, the fake chicken now it's just as good, if not better, than any chicken you'll find at fucking McDonald's. It's all like
it's the chicken
beef.
they're serving at KFC.
Oh, I didn't know they have it there now.
Yeah, the green banded KFC tub has returned.
Nice. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, and it's like the shit that they have for chicken, for beef, and for pork sausage, it's all better than the quality you would find at a fast food restaurant now. So I'm like, I'm just giving up pork sausage as it is because the Beyond sausage is better, or it's Impossible sausage. That's better than pork sausage because I don't have to worry about fucking bones in my shit.
Well, dude, when I came over and we played computer games and those had the Impossible meatballs, I will challenge anybody. I'll pay for them, but like I don't think anyone can taste the difference. I don't give a fuck who you are. I don't care how much meat you think you've eaten. In a blind test, if all things are prepared properly, you can't tell the difference between a Beyond meatball and a beef ball. Maybe not a Chinese style beef ball. Maybe more like an Italian beef ball.
And I think that's just the way it was prepared. If we had put it like in sweet and sour sauce or
you're right. You're 100. I agree completely.
Then at that point it would be completely indistinguishable. Because that's where I'm like, I've been trying different meatballs. There was like a jackfruit meatball that they have now. It's fucking delicious. Anybody who tried it and if it was prepared correctly, you would not be able to tell that it's not real meat, like not an animal.
Yeah.
And there's times when I'm eating and I'm like, oh my God, I forgot this was fake. I forgot this was not real meat.
And it's not like when people grill a watermelon.
No, God, no. I refuse to try shit like that. Fuck that. That's some food gentrification right there. Like, I refuse to do shit like that where it's like, it's not even remotely tasting like the thing that they're pretending it's trying to be. Whereas they're actually trying to make it mimic the texture, the flavor, and the experience to the point where some of them, in my opinion, surpass like low grade versions of the real thing, quote unquote. Because that's where I'm like, yeah, if you go to a fucking gourmet restaurant where you only eat one meatball in a dish and it was like a $70 meatball, yeah, you're going to be able to taste the difference. But it's not necessarily because of the meat. It's because of the spices they used or the ingredients or something that's going to make it different. And at this point, it's like, it's not, the texture is pretty indistinguishable. It's like how it's cooked that determines the difference, where I don't think they've reached that point with steaks yet, but they're getting close. They haven't reached it with bacon, but I never cared for bacon that much. Like, I'll eat bacon, but I'm fine not eating bacon. I don't need bacon in my life necessarily. It's cool, but I was always like sausage over bacon if I had the choice.
Yeah.
So now that they have Impossible sausage, I'm cool. I don't need any more pork. I don't need to have a meal in which pork is in the mix just because there's plenty of other options in which nothing has to die now, and they're just as good, if not better.
What was I'm trying to think of like the origin of adding meat to the diet when it wasn't necessary, when there were already alternatives that were available? And like, why did we keep meat on? Was it an industrial thing? Was it a social stratification thing? As in, like, if you can afford meat, you should get it because that's where you're at in your social status? Or
Dude, nothing in America was ever organic. Everything since like the 1940s has been from an advertising
Bring
campaign.
home the bacon.
Literally everything. And that's where it's like there was an advertising campaign to start putting bacon in everything at some point. I forget what decade it was, but that's how it started.
It was right.
how-
It was
it's how you
right
get
before
people-
the. It was right before the Great Depression, I believe. There was this whole thing
okay.
about bring home the bacon.
Yeah.
And it was similar to the whole
'cause it goes
pineapple
back-
fetish. Like, you know, how people would carry around pineapples to demonstrate opulence. Well, people would buy bacon and like straight up put it on like a hanger in the kitchen, just hang it. That's how you know, because they could afford to hang the bacon out.
They get
it's
these.
also how we get people to eat their vegetables, you know, like bacon sprinkles on Brussels sprouts and stuff like that.
Okay, bacon as a condiment is a completely different realm. Bacon has this strange duality. It's like simultaneously a condiment that's not a meat, and also a meat that can be the main course or a supplementary, you know, constituent element of a dish.
But that's only because of these types of pushes, and that's where
Yeah.
again it wasn't always like that.
Oh no,
And I think if anything, we hit this saturation point where everything, like, there's bacon jam and fucking every type of bacon you can imagine, like, or something with bacon on it. And I think that's where it became this issue of like, well, it became so standard that this to me becomes the type of issue where when people start thinking of bacon as a condiment, that's how
well that's just dangerous.
it's dangerous for many reasons, but that's how their palates become desensitized.
Yeah.
Because it's like, oh, bacon is the same as ketchup to some people, or like ranch dressing.
I think some people think of bacon as a salt more than meat.
Exactly. And they're gonna put salt on top of that thing that they just put bacon
They're
on.
going to do salt on top of salt, like a bacon
because
cheeseburger.
Their palates are completely blown out. I've seen people put just crazy amounts of salt on French fries that came out already salted. And it's like, they'll put salt in their ketchup. And it's like, man, this is the end result of having bacon in everything. And the fact that there's cups and cups of sugar in the ketchup. There's just sugar everywhere. Sugar is fucking everywhere.
So for the population that already can't taste anything, and it's like self-induced. Now there's an extra dimension of overlap within the Venn diagram of people who've had like long haulers or COVID and lost their sense of taste and smell. I think that there might be a correlation between that and increased sodium intake and it's that thing that heart disease.
Yeah. There's also myocarditis.
So this is a whole
that Joe Rogan was arguing with the doctor about. What kind of asshole argues with doctors when you're not a doctor in any field? Because that's where you don't have to be a medical doctor. You don't have to be a physicist. You don't have to be a fucking cybersecurity expert, art history expert. If somebody's a doctor and you're just like arguing them down in their field of expertise, what kind of
they're not listening.
Idiocy?
That's the kind of that's every bar USA on a Friday night.
My God.
That's
I saw a meme, and I'm not sure if it came from his show or not. But it was Joe Rogan. It was basically a situation in which Joe Rogan would argue the presence of ham in a hamburger because it has the word ham in it.
That was based off of the. I mean, he does it frequently, but that was based off of him arguing against a doctor about myocarditis in people who get the vaccine versus people who get COVID.
You know, the thing about the whole carditis thing and pericarditis thing is like, out of the 100 million plus people in the United States that got it, like 1,000 maybe, I think it's like 1,800 or something last time I looked, actually experienced it in some way that they didn't like recover from 100% in a normal period of time. Like everyone who's got some kind of COVID related or vaccine related myocarditis in America has recovered. Everyone in like Europe who experienced it has recovered. It's not, that's the big concern, and not the litany of biological issues that somebody might experience for the rest of their life. I don't think there's actually anything that can be said to, or there's no real discussion with that person, because they're afraid of something that's like way down on the list of things that is practically guaranteed to happen if you are an unfortunate person who has HLA expression that returns a really complex reaction to the virus. Like, you have the wrong HLA expression, doesn't matter how tough you are, how many rocks you've licked, how much pee you drank, your immune system's chemical reaction to the presence of a virus will be insufficient and will cause the body to go haywire.
Well, the people who are using
pee,
like the people who rely on those types of methodologies and approaches to logic, I'll use the term loosely, aren't real. I don't know that they're really relying on the antibody expressions as their guiding compass in terms of the decisions that they're making. I think it's more of a confirmation bias kind of thing in terms of information that comes to them that confirms their fears already and allows and seems to justify their actions and their opinions.
Yeah, Joe Rogan is 100%. All he does is confirmation bias, down to he doesn't use Google Scholar, number one. Number two, anytime he's trying to find information, it's always the information that's reinforcing his point of view. So he's not open to new information when he's established how he thinks about something, but he pretends he is and will just sit there and fight about it until he finds something that reconfirms his original perspective and be like, well, no, I was actually correct. So even though we debated this thing, I'm open-minded enough to debate it, but I'm still correct, because that's how it ends up every time. He never concedes a position.
Yeah. There are a lot of people out there who've never even considered bias analysis. Like,
he doesn't know what the fuck that means,
no,
bro.
I know.
Because then
there are a lot of
they're
people
saying
like
that there's mass-induced psychosis as to why people are taking the vaccine, when these motherfuckers don't know what Dunning-Kruger or confirmation bias are. So there's like armchair psychologists who don't even know what they're doing. It is like this. Oh, there's a whole description for what they're doing, but they don't know enough to know that.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so absurd that they've created this echo chamber that they like. There's only like 8 million of them, and they make it seem like there's 100 million Joe Roganauts or whatever the fuck you want to call them. Like, that little cult is not as big as they want people to think it is. And that's where his influence comes from, his cult members shouting other people down and just being loud and obnoxious and making it seem like they're these successful fucking
Ronads.
Ronads. Yes, Ronads. Oh my God.
Well, that's I think that's the problem is that we believe a lot of people will believe that their ability to analyze and evaluate is exact and precise, and so whatever they land on has to be the answer. But without proper bias assessment or bias analysis, it's impossible to know how far off the mark one is or how big the actual scope was to determine where they landed in the first place.
The Ronad conundrum.
The Ronad conundrum.
Oh man. Well, and it's okay. I've done human subjects testing in an actual lab, and then I'm in the process of getting approval for doing research in the real world. There's a whole process so that people don't get unethically exploited, and it's meant to protect humans and animals. I mean, there's different restrictions and a whole different system for animals testing, but human subjects have there's a whole system to protect people from having research done on them in the academic setting. This doesn't necessarily exist in the same way in the private sector setting. So this is how you get Rogan able to say things about untested treatments and not get legal, like the only thing that can happen to him is a bunch of doctors come and say, hey, this guy's being irresponsible. The government can't do anything. They could, but they would probably actually lose a litigation case against him when it came, which is crazy that the government would lose against themselves, but the people or the organization that would do it would be able to be sued, and another part of the government would have to defend it. So that's where, or litigate it. So this is where, again, there are systems in place so that if someone says something that is illegal, they will be taken to task. But people in the private sector have a lot of freedom, and that includes suggesting untested medical treatments because of the way pharmaceuticals are treated as a commodity. And that's where shit is only murky because of the pharmaceuticals. And it's not just them, but the way that health has been commodified in the first place. But people like Joe Organ coming in and like selling nootropics and selling fucking snake oil, and then trying to be like, oh, there's this medical treatment that I know they're giving away the free vaccine, but there's this stuff that you can go buy, and I don't have any investment in the stock. There's no way I personally have invested in the stock of the ivermectin companies, but doctors are keeping it from you, so you should go buy this ivermectin, and that's where it'll keep you healthy from COVID, even though they've got this free option in the vaccine. So it's like the things that they're saying, because it's not just him, it's like his little cohorts and his little posse. Now Dana White's joining in the chorus of we're fucking oppressed millionaires. And
Dana White thinks he's oppressed. That dude has enough money to throw a fucking fight on a private island in the Middle East. He's not oppressed for shit.
He's literally telling people, it's not just because I'm a rich guy. If it was 6 months ago, you could get this stuff too. You need to go to your doctors and tell them to get you ivermectin, because they all starting to sound like Alex Jones at this point. They all, like, all the testosterone has like made them all start to look like the same person, and they're all morphing into fucking Kingpin. It's like their fucking torsos are all swelling up and their arms are getting big and veiny, and it's like their bald heads are starting to make them all morph into the same, like they're all Kingpin now, and they're all starting to think that way. And it's like the way that they're trying to use their platforms to strong arm the government, and in the process use their little cults to send hordes after people and act like they don't know what they're doing. It's basically they're fucking king. They want to be kingpins, man. And that's the funniest shit about it, is they're all like morphing into the same person.
I wonder how much beef they all have to eat to get that much growth hormones so that they all get all beef necked. Like there's it's only elk that they've shot with their bows. That's the only thing that they eat now. No vegetables, just elk. I'm reluctant to believe that because I've watched an episode of Meat Eater where Joe Rogan misses the deer with him. So it's not a bad episode, but I
I don't know if you remember when Brock Lesnar got diverticulitis, because all he eats is like meat and potatoes and bread, basically.
Oh my!
And they had to fucking cut out part of his intestine because he just has a horrible diet. And these are the people that guys listen to when they don't have good father figures, basically.
You know, I have a theory about like that whole style of bodybuilder that walks around like they're perpetually clenched. It's not so much because they're flexing to do isometric training. It's that they don't want to shit their pants.
I mean, it's not untrue, man. Their diets are so horrible. That's not untrue.
Like, I'm pretty sure if you eat nothing but protein and drink nothing but protein shakes, I'm pretty sure that all that happens is you piss everything out. Doesn't matter which
guys
organ.
Don't stretch either. They don't stretch because it's feminine. They think stretching is feminine and it makes them effeminate. Like, oh, you gonna do some of that yoga shit? You gonna start wearing yoga pants now? You gonna start tucking your dick and doing yoga? That's how they think of it, and it's like,
well,
that's why they look like they're carrying watermelons underneath their fucking arms. It's because they can't put them down. They don't have the fucking mobility to actually just put their arms down. So they make it look like, oh yeah, I'm puffing out my last. No, these motherfuckers can't actually put their arms down after a certain point because they forgot if you just keep on building up those muscles and don't stretch them, they won't actually have mobility.
I mean, if tucking my junk behind my legs allows me to get into a full cobra pose and opens up my iliopsoas so that I can walk properly and stand up and get into a complete squat and then stand up from that without hurting myself, I'll do it. I don't need to do that because you shouldn't have to do that.
RuPaul's over here, guys. RuPaul's doing yoga. That's how they think of it, man. It's so like,
oh, that's so.
It's so reductionist and absurd, but that's exactly how they think.
I mean, it's It's like adorable in a Calvin and Hobbes foil nemesis kind of way. The kid down the street that's like kind of dark and has a cap that's tilted off to the side, and they're never really cool with Calvin, and you only see them like lurking and they're a jerk. That's the only way that's kind of endearing. It's like, that's right. That's that neighborhood bully that nobody really remembers, but everyone didn't like, and that's why nobody remembers them. I'm sure that they're like a building superintendent now.
Sounds like these people could really benefit from more magnesium in their diets.
Magnesium is actually critical to the processing of calcium. Like, it doesn't matter how much calcium you get in your milk or your diet if you're not eating enough broccoli to get enough magnesium to make use of that calcium. There are a lot of foods like that. Like you need salt and potassium. They need each other. Like those two things make the respective pump work at the cellular level.
Okay, this is not tangential, but at first it's going to sound tangential. Have either of you seen Peacemaker?
No.
No.
Okay, you should definitely watch it when you get a chance. But one of the best parts about it is I feel like they let John Cena write some of it because of the way that this character's body dysmorphia comes through. It's like one out of every 10
they
comments.
gave that character its own show.
Oh yeah, it's fucking amazing. And James Gunn's very heavily involved.
Oh, he was the best part about that horrible
It's
movie.
fucking amazing. And I was like, I didn't really like Peacemaker. I don't give a fuck about the character. And in the movie, I was like, okay, whatever. He was, like you said, he was a good part of that movie.
That was a terrible movie.
Yeah, in the grand scheme, is in the sense of like James Gunn did the best with what he could have.
Yeah. And
that's where I'm like, it is what it is. It's definitely like a 6 out of 10 film if everyone's honest with themselves, but I don't think it's anyone's particular fault. It's not a bad movie on its own, but in the grand scheme of comic book movies, it has to, like, you have to be like 6 out of 10 if we're just being honest with ourselves. And like I said, it's the same way with Eternals. It's like 6 out of 10 if you're being honest. It's not a horrible film. It didn't 5 out of 10, but it didn't hit 7. And that's where I'm like, a 6 is not bad in the grand scheme of like, you watch a lot of movies.
It's not a failure.
Yeah. But that's where I'm like, if we're just honest with ourselves, where we're like, Starro, okay, Starro was like a terrible choice of a villain for this time and age. Like, I get what James Gunn was trying to do, but I think that he's really in touch with a certain group that are gonna like lie to him. And that's the problem, is like nobody was honest with him in his circle about Starro. Starro's like, it's not Starro would have worked in like 1990. Maybe
1987.
Yeah, but right now Starro just doesn't work for what he was trying to represent, and it was like it went over too many people's heads. I get it. Personally, I thought the film was like an 8, but because of the way that it was out of touch with modernity, I had to give it a 6 in my personal, like, in my realistic assessment. And that's like, not, like I said, it's nobody's fault except for the fact that somebody in his circle should be like, hey, don't go with Starro. Maybe if Starro's there, have evil Superman with the Starro thing like you had originally intended. And if Warner Brothers says no, don't do the fucking film, because it turns out a 6. And if somebody would have just told him that, we wouldn't have got it. But it was all worth it to get Peacemaker. And that's, like I said, 1 out of 10 comments on that show is about his body dysmorphia. It's a brilliant show for many reasons. And I think someone said it really well, is that it's an actual TV show and not just a movie that's broken up into little segments.
It's episodic.
Yeah.
It's not a story arc. I mean, there might be overarching, but it's primarily episodic.
It does both well.
Okay.
And that's the difference between a TV show and I think something that's just long form and broken up into episodes arbitrarily.
Well, like, what was it? Discovery was episodic for a while, and then it became a movie, and then it's tried to be episodic again, but it's turning back into a movie.
Exactly. I don't think they were ever able to break that.
No.
And that's where you can tell they just filmed it as a movie, and then they're like
Picard
breaking
is
it
a
up.
movie, but it's worth it though. That's like, we needed that. That was like, what is it? 3 hours of Picard.
And those are
movie?
fine. They're fine when they do that, but I think representing it as those are like mini series where when you call it like a mini series instead of a TV show, there's the understanding of the difference. And I mean, some people understand. I don't know if a lot of people could get it, but a miniseries makes it clear that there's like a beginning and an end of the arc.
Yeah.
Even if there are episodes, whereas a TV series like is effectively making it open-ended until it gets canceled. And that's why having a cap on a series is like, as of now, I don't think it's capped. So Peacemaker runs, it watches like a TV show that's episodic and weekly, but also still has an overarching narrative. And that's where I feel like James Gunn probably works better in this format than movie based on what he's able to do with the characters.
I just like John Cena. I think he's fun in his roles. He looks like he enjoys his roles. He looks like he has fun making those movies, or I guess TV show. I think that he would be like, because he can do that kind of silly slapstick, get beat up, but walk, get up and wipe it off kind of vibe. What was it? Ernest P. Worrell, right? I think that's a character that I'd like to see John Cena do, like Ernest Goes to Camp.
I mean, he was acting his ass off in both of them, and as far as I can tell, and that's where for transitioning from WWE wrestler to actor, I think he's done a great job of taking it seriously and improving in his craft. But it's like he's really good, and I think this probably comes from him like getting into character by wearing the fucking suit around literally 24/7.
He's a big kid.
Part of it, but he's not wanting to be in the show. So there's this element of like, he was trying, like, I don't know if you guys realize, he was literally wearing the suit for the Peacemaker, like in real life, 24/7 while I forget if it was during Suicide Squad or the TV show. Might have even been both. But he would be wearing this shit just like around town and fucking just in Peacemaker uniform. So there's this element of when he did that in real life, it translates into something in the character where you're like, oh, he's really committed to getting in touch with this character and his mindset. So I think that's where I'm like, man, I see when people make that kind of effort to make the character transcend the screen, and I think he's done a great job of doing that without like, I think he did that. Like, he had the help of James Gunn and James Gunn giving him the spotlight, but he took it and gave it a different, he put his own like spirit into the character in a way that now Peacemaker is interesting. Peacemaker was not like, anybody who pretends they're into Peacemaker before John Cena, fuck you, you're a liar. You're a fucking liar. You know what I mean? Fuck you.
I didn't even know who Peacemaker was until they did that shit. And
Exactly.
I don't really care, but I really like John Cena's like portrayal of this character, because he's not super serious like Superman, and he's not super serious like Batman, and he's not like he's a different kind of showboat than Green Lantern. He's interesting.
Well,
there's something
James Gunn,
he's just a little different,
specifically because he's obscure and nobody cares about Peacemaker. That's one of the reasons he picked him and Polka Dot Man and Ratcatcher. Like, he picked the characters in that movie specifically because nobody knows or cares about them. So anybody who claims they did before those movies is a fucking liar. Just lying.
I mean, I know that Idris Elba was in that movie, but I can't even remember what his character did.
You remember which one?
I mean, I know that Idris Elba was in the latest Suicide Squad movie, but like, I don't remember I don't actually remember what his character's role was, other than to be the saboteur.
Most of his accomplishments were in passing, as he put Superman in the hospital.
Oh.
I think he hit him with a kryptonite bullet or some shit. I forget exactly what it was, but that was his claim to fame. And most of his action, like I said, most of his action didn't happen on screen.
Yeah.
Which is where I think, I don't know if this has been publicly debunked or not, but I think there was like a version of the story that James wanted Superman to have been taken over by Starro, and that's where we would have seen Superman with the Starro
the
fish on his face, but we wouldn't have ever seen if it was Cavill or not.
Yeah.
And that was like, I think the WB didn't allow that or something. So that's kind of where I think the story that we got is one that was also based on being restricted from what he wanted to actually do as far as including other characters. Because that's where, like I said, he would have had shot Superman and put him in the hospital, and Bloodsport would have had like probably more screen time that was action.
Wasn't there a Starro story arc in Batman Beyond where the future Justice League got taken over by Starro-like aliens?
I didn't make it past season 2. I think I stopped at like mid-season 2, so there may have been, I just didn't see it.
I watched the movie of Batman Beyond, but I've never been able to watch it. Like I'm familiar with like characters within this story to a certain extent, but I don't know.
Well, the pacing's just off.
Yeah.
And it doesn't get any better. I mean, I'm sure it works for kids or teenagers, but as an adult, it's like really hard to watch. I tried rewatching it, and it's just like,
yeah, I couldn't rewatch Batman, the animated series even. Like I tried to watch that. I tried to watch other. I mean, I can watch some of the movies, but even if you go back far enough, they start getting like Mask of the Phantasm was one of those first really dark Batman the animated series movies, and even now it's like tame and it's
hard to watch. The pacing is really bad too. There's too many long, drawn out panning scenes for animation.
Yeah,
it's like animated
for animation that doesn't have any detail because it's all dark.
Exactly. Yeah, it's way too simple for those scenes to sit on the screen as long as they do. And I think if the scenes were interesting and they were really detailed, it'd be one thing, but they just aren't.
Yeah, but they made that horrible Batman Ninja movie, so they obviously didn't learn that too much is too much.
Right. That's very true.
I think that there are a lot of people with their hands on the reins of the Batman intellectual property, and they're not talking to each other, and they all want to make their version of the Batman story. And I was thinking about, how I have this tendency to come up with stories like for their alter egos, like my Clark Kent goes home for Thanksgiving and gets drunk story. It occurred to me that there's actually a version of Bruce Wayne that isn't Batman, and the Joker is just like his best friend. He's a comedian. He just shows up and tells jokes and loves to party. And Dick is still his ward, and everyone still has their normal job. Selena Kyle is still his girlfriend. She still shows up and tries to get him to go out, but he's always running off with the Joker to party. And so, at some point he gets sick, and because it's Bruce and he's the head of Wayne Corp and has vast pharmaceutical resources at his disposal, he's like taking everything, and none of it works. And eventually he's like, home, and he's dying. He thinks he's dying, and he's like in some kind of pharmacological psychosis because he's just taken so many drugs that anything is everything now, and he's just out of his mind. And next thing you know, he finds himself in his basement. Part of Wayne Manor he hasn't been in since he was a kid, and discovers his dad's theater and presses play on the projector, and it's some old ass episode of Batman from like the 30s when Batman's cape was like barely below his shoulder blades, and the ears were just these like tiny little jokes of bat ears, and he fought bank robbers and people stealing. By today's standards, ridiculous small sums of money, like not even $100,000. They're going for tens of thousands of dollars, and the Penguin's just a corrupt businessman, that kind of stuff. And next thing you know, he's found his old Batman costume, and at this point, it's a kid's costume, and he's an adult, so it's only coming down to like his elbows, and then the pants only come down to his knees, and the cape is even shorter. But he's like out of his mind, and he's hiding in the shadows like, I am the night, I am Batman. It's because he's on drugs, though. This is the version of Batman where, after he comes to, the doctor takes his blood and says, "Oh, you have a very rare bat flu. Have you been traveling lately?" And that's it. It's an allegory about people seeking solutions to symptoms and taking too many drugs and thinking they're Batman.
The bat flu.
The bat
I like
flu.
that. I like that.
I mean, it's supposed to be dark. It's not actually. This one's not a comedy like the other one. Because at some point there has to be a story about Bruce that's like real, where he's just kind of a billionaire playboy who's kind of a sociopath, and he doesn't even hang out with his girlfriend. He'd rather go run around with his comedian friend and cause all sorts of chaos. Beating up lowlifes on the street to get their kicks.
Well, there's like a Robin King version of Bruce Wayne that I think he's the one that kills his parents. I think he killed the parents and he kills Alfred. And then just takes over, and then that version of him is a complete sociopath from like 5 on with the $1 billion, and that's where that version of him is like
not even Batman.
No, it's not even Batman, but it's like a Robin, the king of all Robins, because then he like, as the child soldier, realized that the Robin was always more deadly in this version of the tale. So that's kind of where the Bat Who Laughs ends up getting him and part of his army. So it's like the Robin King is the most sadistic version of Bruce at the youngest age, but the Bat Who Laughs is the one who got infected with the Joker's toxin, and then becomes a murderer after like being transformed. So there's like they've done damn near every iteration of Bruce Wayne in the Infinite, what's it called? Infinite Frontier.
The Omniverse.
Yeah, and Well, they created the omniverse, and then there's the hyperverse. So the multiverse is like the main 52. Then the omniverse covers everything, including, I think, live action. No. Hold on. The omniverse is the one that includes all the resets, and then the hyperverse is the one that includes the live action into the real world stuff.
Yeah.
So they've like,
They built bridges.
yeah, there's bridges between the different layers of reality, and then there's fourth wall breaking people that exist, characters that exist in the real world in which we supposedly exist, that are also comic book characters, and then they use these to go back and forth. I think it's one of the Supermans in the or it might even be a Superboy, but I forget like exactly which comic they do it, but he's aware of DC Comics being a comic book, but then he realizes he has superpowers, so he starts to wonder if he's in that universe. So that's how they start to connect. Yeah. There's like what is it? The Monitor, and then his mother is Perpetua. And there's like a whole race of species, like a whole race of beings that are the same type of like celestial level universe or multiverse creators, but we haven't seen all of them yet. So we know like Monitor and Anti-Monitor had the capacity to create and destroy universes, and then Perpetua had the capacity to create and destroy multiverses, which is what the Bat Who Laughs, or wait, no, the Darkest Night at that point, because there's like this whole thing of these transitions, because the Bat Who Laughs thing goes and like he travels through the multiverse and kills Dr. Manhattan before the transition, and then inserts himself into Dr. Manhattan's origin story. So then he becomes Bat Hatton, and then from Bat Hatton, then he goes and like, I forget exactly what he does from that point, but then he becomes the Darkest Night. Because there's all these things where you think that they're trying to settle on a new hero, or a new villain rather, that the Justice League is going to have to then overcome, but then they'll kill him off in this evolution cycle before the Justice League will even have a chance to fight him. So there's a lot of shit that DC tried to reconcile in the writing. And if you read it all, they kind of did a good job in making it all work and be possible to exist, but you have to read it all, which is why if you don't read it all, it looks like a fucking mess. And that's kind of where I see the criticisms of DC's continuity problems. And as you said, it's because these writers just want to they all want to do their own version of Batman. So instead of like fighting that DC went with it, they're like, okay, we'll let Batman exists in all these different forms. There's even a baby Batman. And it's like, okay, touche, guys. We see what we understand that, yes, there's every version of Batman, but let's like create a story that means something, that matters, because then nothing matters. If you extrapolate this fractal multiverse too far, then everything stops mattering, which is why nobody stays dead. And that's like, it makes it less interesting if the stakes have been removed completely. And I think it ends up making it really difficult for DC to do anything of significance when they can't kill off any of the characters permanently, because people will riot. Or they get stuck in these cycles where it's like everything has to cater to Batman mythos now. And I think it limits the writer's capacities to tell stories because everything has to revolve around, well, does this work with the Batman property? Will this harm the Batman property? And like every DC thing seems to want to make sure it doesn't harm Batman as a franchise, as far as I can tell.
Has there ever been any crossover between the Sandman universe and the DC Batman universe?
Oh yeah. I think they even had a comic together. But that's where I'm like, I know that if within DC and the way that Sandman's properties were integrated, almost all of that shit is like canon now. In the they even had Lucifer crossover on Legends of Tomorrow on the TV show.
Oh yeah.
Like, so they're heavily integrated at this point in that when originally written, it was its own universe, but because of how popular the series were, they started getting integrated into other series heavily. And I don't know the exact issue, but I'm fairly positive that they crossed over with Sandman specifically.
And I know that. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was going to say there's a collection of works of Neil Gaiman, who authored some stories and some storylines for the Batman property as well. So there could have been some intellectual and imaginary integration from that standpoint.
It's been so long since I read Sandman.
I was just thinking, like,
Yeah, they definitely crossed over in death metal, where it's like there'll be basically Justice League and Sandman universe crossovers. There's been like, and it looks like Neil was not happy with some of them just because it doesn't seem like he was necessarily involved.
He opened a door and then he got mad that other people just started using it.
I think it was the way that they used it, not necessarily that they were using it.
Yeah, well.
Yeah, because that's where he'll get involved with stuff that adapts his characters or his properties and not necessarily take complete control, but he'll basically put a stamp of approval on things like Lucifer. He was the voice of God at one point before, what is it? Dennis Haysbert, I think he introduced. I forget, but yeah, like the Sandman universe is interesting, and I guess technically it's the same as the one within Lucifer, which in Lucifer exists.
Lucifer exists in the Sandman's universe.
Right.
I mean, Preacher exists in the Sandman's universe.
Right, and that's what I mean in the sense of like they had already started establishing their own little pantheon of characters in that universe before DC absorbed them into the larger mythos.
It looks like Preacher is not considered to be part of the Sandman universe.
Huh.
That's very strange.
That is strange. Well, anyway, it's like because of the gravity of the characters, that the way that they were written in their own universe, that's kind of how they were able to incorporate it as its own layer of the multiverse in DC Pantheon, or their larger story arc. But then this is where Dr. Manhattan and what was it? I forget the name of that series. It wasn't 0 Hour, because that was a different one. Doomsday Clock. Dr. Manhattan reset it once, and that was basically before New 52. And then it got reset again after New 52, because New 52 didn't do well. I forget who undid that one, but then they just reset it again. And basically now Wonder Woman is the force that drives the entire hyperverse. Like, Wonder Woman went to hell and basically had to fight out of hell. And it was like Batman and Superman were dead the entire time, and had like it was like a super crazy story as far as like the way that they had to weave it all together. And then Lobo was hired by Lex Luthor to find I don't think it was a mother box. It was like that's what it was. It was like some stone that allows the person who holds it to rewrite the universe, or a universe. And then once Lobo he started rewriting. There was like a brief Lobo verse. And it's like,
what is that? I feel like that would just be like a really overwhelming White Zombie music video.
That's what it felt like. There was all these different Lobos fighting, going after each other, and then the one Lobo basically saved all of existence, because he was commissioned by Lex Luthor as part of a larger plan, in which Lex was. It looked like he was trying to seize power, but he was actually just trying to save everything. And part of it was like, it's like so convoluted, but because DC continuity had become very kind of convoluted. So as you see when they're writing these stories, like I said, if you don't read them all, it just looks like a complete dumpster fire. But when you read them all, you're like, oh, okay, I guess it kind of makes sense as to where everything went wrong. And then you gotta have Bruce Wayne going, an evil Bruce Wayne jumping through all the DC continuities, fucking up people, stealing their powers, basically, and becoming one of the biggest threats to DC's existence. And that was like ultimately the larger narrative is like, hey, Bruce Wayne is threatening DC because he's becoming a bane to DC's existence. And they actually ended up spinning it really well and making the fact that Bruce Wayne is stifling their properties work. So that's where I'm like, okay, I see what happened and how you tried to undo it, and it kind of worked for me as someone who's like a huge Batman fan but sick of DC getting stuck in this Batman rut. Like the only way they could have done that is to go deep down the Bruce Wayne rabbit hole and be like, okay, these are all of the Bruce Waynes we can think of. Are you guys happy? Are you happy now?
That's why I want to see a Bruce Wayne story where Batman is a manifestation of some drug psychosis. Where
I mean, that's the Bat Who Laughs, but it's like it's the Joker's drug.
But a very tame version where he's just like kind of loopy and wanders around his house, stumbling around because there isn't actually
that's Bat Baby. and that's what I'm saying. They did all of those things that you mentioned in different like parts. All of those things are scattered around different parts of Bruce Wayne, and the Bat Baby is like the comic relief where Bat Baby always has these like crazy goals and can build a fucking hover. I don't even know what you would call it. It's like a little hover thing that carries its bat body.
That's what a delusional Bruce wants to do is get a hover bike so he can go down to the kitchen and get something to eat. But what actually happens is he can't even get one of his slippers on and ends up falling down some stairs.
And that's how Bat Baby ends up becoming, is like he has these really big accomplishments and he'll get so far and then he like ends up falling on his big ass baby head or some shit.
Yeah.
And it's like there's like a Bruce Wayne that's a Tyrannosaurus Rex. There's a Bruce Wayne that's a sentient monster truck. There's a Bruce Wayne that is Gotham City itself.
Yeah.
There's like, and that sentient Gotham City Bruce Wayne is the one universe in which the Bat Who Laughs and Robin King make their empire. So it's like they're living in a sentient Gotham City Bruce Wayne. So it's like Bruce Wayne is literally a fucking city that's, although they allude to Gotham being sentient in many iterations, which is also kind of cool in the sense of like it's a poisonous city that eventually poisons everybody who lives in it. Well, that's because in this iteration, Bruce Wayne is the sentience that wants everybody to come in and succumb to the darkness. It's like very deliberately just like discerning that this thing is a dark entity. And it's like all of the notion that Bruce Wayne is a good, an agent of good are thrown out. And almost all of the Bruce Waynes in this story are agents of chaos, and to the point where it's like an army of bats. There's like the Baphomet, that's the Cthulhu version. There's like the Drowned, that's a female Bruce Wayne. I forget the name, but it's like Aquaman. Or I guess Aquawoman, but Bruce Wayne, if he was raised in Atlantis. They have so many versions of Bruce Wayne. There's the Bruce Wayne that took over Cyborg fucking murder machine, and he killed Cyborg and took over the mother box. And that was definitely a murderer, because that's why they call him Murder Machine. Like I said, I could go on and on and on with how many different versions that they actually made.
Developed.
Canonical. These are canonical Bruce Waynes. These aren't just like me reading this one book and them existing in this one book. They're out floating in the universe still. In the
that's the
Omniverse.
That's the big gateway that they opened up with Omniverse, is that if you can think it exists now. Basically. Whether or not it's been explored in a comic, a graphic novel, animated series, or whatever.
Video game.
Video games are just as part of canon as anything now. Video games are just stories that you can participate in.
Because there's Mortal Kombat versus the DC universe.
Yeah, I mean, well, there's the Arkham games, and then there's the Gotham Knight games. Or, yeah, I think they're coming. The Gotham Knights game is coming out. There's like the Justice League. Or Suicide Squad kills Justice League, I think. There's a bunch of games, yeah, and they exist within a universe in the same way that the MCU games exist within a universe. But that's also then it becomes this issue of like, then there's no stakes because nobody can actually die. And I think that's what was it? Nightwing got killed and became Dayman.
Champion of the Sun.
Basically.
Master of karate and friendship for everyone.
Basically, that is not something I made up to be a fucking Always Sunny reference. DC did that. And what's his name? Damien actually killed him on accident because they were fighting about, I think they were fighting about who was better. And then fucking Damien hit him in the neck with the, like a tonfa or some shit. Or like a baton, and it broke his neck. And he's like, hey, I was just joking around. But he was already dead. So then it's like, I think that happened in, was it Justice League Dark? I forget. But it happened in the comics too, because it happened in the Dark Knights heavy metal or the death metal series. They did it in the comics and the animated universe, but that's where I'm like, it's still not permanent. He just died and then became a different entity. So that's fine, but it doesn't feel like anything becomes important if everybody just dies and becomes another type of superhero.
Like reincarnation myths.
Right. It's definitely reincarnation. Because then, what was it? Dayman could take over people's bodies briefly or some shit. So his new power, he even got a new suit and everything. So I'm like, man,
was he a ghost?
He was, but he was a ghost in a realm that was basically a different plane of existence. So it made it seem like he'd be able to cross back over to the other plane of existence, because that's what they did in Titans, where it's like if you make it back before a certain period of time has elapsed, then you don't die. But it's like either if the ghouls eat your soul or you stay over on this side too long or stay on the train till it gets to your destination, then you die. So it's like it's completely not involuntary whether a person dies or not, and they have some agency whether they can come back from the dead, which is, it's a cool allegory, but when it's overused and overplayed, then it makes death meaningless. And I think that's why it's like DC doesn't want to make any commentary about morality in death, but they want to include the afterlives that were meant to be moral allegories. Like that's what afterlife is meant to be in religions, is like, hey, these are metaphors, and in some cases people start to misunderstand them and misinterpret them as literal, to be like, hey, you'll mentally be in this place if you do these things. So if you want to be in heaven, you should live this way. And people then started misinterpreting that as literal places of like, oh, heaven up, hell down. And they start imagining these like actual physical corresponding places to the things described, which are clearly just allegories. But that's where, again, it's like these people are not good at nuance. And when you have someone who's the subject of their religion walking around telling parables, telling people, explaining them life stories through stories that they can understand, stories. It's clear that these things are meant to express a way of living as stories to express ways of living, not as historical facts. But these people are then taught only to read this. Well, they don't even read it, only to listen to the constructions of these stories as told by their local pastor in their local church, So then they get these cult-like understandings of how they're supposed to read these stories in that they don't question them and they don't look at them as allegorical and look at them as historical instead of things meant to tell them lessons. And I guess what it's hard for those people to then coexist in a world where comic books exist, because then the comic books can't be nuanced because they have to play to that same audience, and then they don't want to offend that audience, so then they can't actually tell any moral story about afterlife. And then you get 6 seasons of Lucifer in which hell basically becomes this meaningless metaphor for
Therapy.
Right. Exactly. That's all hell is in Lucifer, is just therapy. Once you get over your therapy, you get out of hell. Good for you.
You get to ascend.
Yep. That's all it is. After 6 fucking seasons. I didn't even watch. I watched every episode but the last one because I was like, fuck this. Fuck this. This is not like, this is not
This is not the character that they've been developing the whole time.
And on top of that, this is a complete waste of a biblical character brought into modern times to tell a relevant morality story that they didn't do. And it just became a big fucking therapy session for Satan.
And the viewers.
Not even. I don't even think it was for the viewers. I think it was specifically.
People. You don't think people really wanted to see how the devil went on a date in a hokey, spooky house and like had fun with his girlfriend? I think that there's definitely a subset of viewers who are like drooling all over watching the devil go out on a date with a human.
Oh yeah,
like, solve mysteries and have fun together. Like that's definitely vicarious living
for sure. But what I guess I thought. And what I mean is that what I thought you meant is like, I don't think anybody watching Lucifer was watching it and then mentally assessing their own emotions as Lucifer was doing in the show. Like nobody was watching Lucifer and coming to understandings about themselves.
Yeah, I don't think it really dove deep enough really to do that. Just kind of scratched the surface and did a lot of like fan service, basically.
I don't know if you've seen The Shrink Next Door, but that's something where I'm like, okay, that's the type of show where people will have no choice but to start assessing themselves in their own actions when you watch it, because it's very in your face how interpersonal relationships are being exploited and being used to manipulate other people. And then it's like, it makes you be like, oh shit, I don't do this, right? And then you like put yourself on the spot because it's clear that something that looks innocuous is clearly something else and is not innocuous and it's malicious. So it forces the viewer to be like, hey, do you do these things or are you the person being exploited? And if you're a person being exploited, you should not let yourself be exploited. So I think that's where when you have a TV show like The Shrink Next Door, because then you come to find out it's based on a fucking true story. Lucifer, definitely not based on a true story. So that's where I'm like, what they were trying to do with Shrink Next Door is intentionally, when you have a character going through therapy, you do have the chance to then make the audience assess themselves in either from the therapist or the person receiving therapy's perspective. Lucifer didn't do that at any point. And it was just all, like you said, it's just fan service. And if anything, it's like, let's make the devil a sympathetic character. He just wanted to please his father, right? And that's what I'm like, I don't know how. It's not wrong. It's not wrong in how they're portraying it, but we didn't really need that story.
I feel like there's a difference between the comic Lucifer and the TV show Lucifer. Like it's not just because his hair is different, you know.
No, they have
like the entire approach is just completely different between the two.
I feel like the comic book version is an adult version and the TV show version is a teenage version that was only daddy issues and nothing else, whereas the comic book one, I feel like he was a younger version of the Yahweh that he wanted to rebel against and came like the way that they left it open to the viewer. That's like kind of how a good story ends, is like some things aren't very certain. And the way that his father treated him, it made it seem like he would eventually become that person doing that thing to the same Lucifer that he was looking at. And we were basically looking at an infinite loop that I understood as an infinite loop in the same way that Watchmen reads as an infinite loop, which is where certain stories are meant to be perfect time loops. And they work that way. Like Terminator was meant to be a perfect time loop story, not turn into this franchise thing. They were always going to lose, basically, and you get stuck. So trying to get out of the time loop is where the story starts to get fucked.
Well, yeah, they can't. If they do anything to alter the path they're on, then they may not find themselves on that path in the first place.
Right, and it's a completely different story.
Yeah.
So then
there's I've actually seen a few breakdowns of Terminator where they explore the idea that there might be, numerous iterations between movies that we're not seeing, where the subtle changes are taking place, and they try to give us hints, but they can't really give us hints without giving away the movie. And
I think they tried to do that with the TV show because they did the Sarah Connor Chronicles.
Yeah.
So I believe that they were trying to do exactly that, but the audience just wasn't smart enough yet again.
Well,
which
Terminator
is why
is tough. It's a really tough story. Like
they were always going to lose.
Yeah. That's the hard pill to swallow with Terminator, is that there is no all of the things that lead to Skynet or whatever net or whatever AI, all of those things were set in motion so long ago that you can't go back that far.
Which is why it becomes a perfect time loop story when we're in the past.
Yep.
So the only thing we can do is wait until we get to the future to see if the time loop was actually worth it, or if this time loop is something that's perpetually getting like. I think the reason it's called a perfect time loop is because it keeps repeating because of the events in which it occurred. Like the problem with time travel is that when you actually create reverse time travel, it can only go in the path that doesn't destroy it. So that's where sending John Connor back actually ensured that the war happens in that path. Yeah. The only way John Connor can, or the only way Reese can go back and preserve John Connor is if that war happens.
Yep.
So by going back, he closed the time loop, and it doesn't actually.
He establishes the continuum.
Right. But the problem with reverse time travel is if you don't want that time loop to change and then go in a direction in which that person, I don't know if it would make them cease to exist or what, or make that reality breakdown, but it has to go back to that almost exact path for them to go back. And it becomes this perfect time loop as to why a lot of time travel stories are wrong. And they're just like,
what was that last one that in the most recent Terminator movie, they kill John Connor off in the beginning as a child. And so now the resistance is being led by somebody else, and Sarah Connor's not even a part of it. And I thought that was a really interesting way to change it up, because then it ensures a different future, a slightly different future. But it turns out that slightly different future is almost identical to the other future that they tried to avoid. And you know what's actually really interesting about a lot of time travel narratives where they try to bend the continuum itself, in almost every iteration they end up destroying the future, like making it so much worse than it already was. I think I think that that TV show Continuum is one of the few iterations where they end up resulting in, or the protagonist ends up at a future outcome that is better than the one that she originated from.
That's only after going through
Hell.
a couple different ones.
Oh yeah.
There was like that the time
police.
The time police, and they I think they had killed at least one.
Oh yeah.
Because there was one on, I think it was at least one on ice, but then she was trapped there, and then Alec was trapped there for a brief period.
That was a really good time travel story.
Yeah.
I think that's an example of a series that definitely had a long arc, a multi-season arc, but they concluded it and it didn't feel like a movie.
Yep.
That's one of my favorite time travel stories, actually.
And it didn't step on its own toes in the time travel.
Yeah.
Like everything they did,
they were
in the
really
time
careful
travel,
in the writing of that story.
It's one of the few that has done it well and made it work. Because obviously any science fiction story, it's like not real. So the writers can do things that are just agency to the story and the narrative. But the better writers make it work within space-time and how space-time functions.
Well,
They at
use
least
it,
on the theoretical level.
They do it like vanilla in a cake, where
right,
you don't really notice it when they do it right, but if it's missing, it's like, where is it? Where's the vanilla? And if the time travel story or the science fiction works out really well, you almost don't even realize it's a science fiction story. Like I see Groundhog Day as a science fiction story, and the only technology that I can think of in the entire movie or the entire story is the clock.
right.
You know, that's
Yeah, I don't think they ever explain why it happened, right?
no, it just did.
It just did.
And then like Adam Sandler made his version of that story, except it was the remote or click, where he gets to travel into the future and he misses out on most of his life. And I didn't even realize that was a sci-fi until like he wakes up in the future. And then it occurred to me, it's like, holy crap, this is a hardcore science fiction story. Like, when it's done right, and I'm surprised that I didn't even realize I was deep into sci-fi. That's the best. That's a sensation that's like, that often eludes me as an adult, but as a child, it was the thing that stirred fancy and made my imagination just start churning. And so those stories still exist. Those storytellers still exist. We need more of those storytellers.
Back to the Future seems so like amazing when it came out, but then now you go back and look at it and it's like, oh, this is really not well thought out. It's very what's the word? It's very dumb time travel rules. I think it's the nicest way to say it.
Well, if our to paraphrase myself, if our best and brightest can figure out and execute time travel, then our worst and most malicious can stumble upon it and somehow get it to work too. Because like Marty McFly was very self-serving.
It's not even that they couldn't get it to work, but the way that like they start disappearing and shit, like that doesn't even fucking make any sense. Like they're completely different. Like that's the shit where I'm like, yeah, he just straight up stole it from Doc Brown. So yeah, a teenager could time travel, But the notion of him just starting to disappear when his parents aren't meeting each other, it's like, well, you're in a different different timeline now.
Yeah, like that in that version of the physics of that universe allow time travel and maintain quantum entanglement across all timelines. How does that? That can't even happen. That couldn't work because if somebody died in a different timeline or a different timeline in a parallel universe, they would disappear in everyone. That can't happen.
Right. Exactly.
That's like the worst story mechanism.
No person, like every person who's traveling in time is still traveling forward, whether the vehicle within which they're moving is traveling backwards in time. So that's why there's this notion of like, you can't go back and undo anything that caused your existence. Like you can't kill your grandfather and make you not exist. That's not how that shit works.
I think that it's like the universal constant is the speed of light. In essence, all atoms are already traveling at the speed of light. We're already traveling at the speed of light. We exist at the speed of light. We can't travel faster than the speed of light.
No, we don't. Light definitely does not travel at the same speed at all times, and it slows down around gravity. So that's where it's like,
oh yeah,
we're definitely not existing at the speed of light.
And
like light, the speed of light does not. I mean,
our perception is bound to the speed of light.
It's slower than the speed of light, and the photons moving around us are not moving at the speed at which they move through the vacuum of space. They're not the same speed of light. It just would seem that way because they're both photons. Like by nature of defining it by the speed of photonic movement, it's like, well, it's a photon and it's moving. Well, it's not move. Photons don't move at the same rate everywhere.
Yes. I think what I mean is that we can't see faster than the speed of light. We can't see slower than the speed of light, really, because our perception is bound to, photons bouncing off of things.
Right. Yeah. And I see. In that we're definitely bound by light in our perception, which is why other animals or insects can see like ultraviolet.
Yeah, they're on a completely different. They function at a different wavelength than we can.
Yeah,
because they can see information traveling at higher wavelengths than we can perceive.
Yeah,
we might be able to feel it. Like our eyes might get really burnt, and our skin might get hot, but they can see the reflection of that ultraviolet light,
which is like it is, I think it was our retina have the capacity to detect one photon.
Yeah.
Or something.
That's the result of a new study.
Yeah. and that's where, again, it's like
single photon.
That's enough to activate, but at the same time, we still need that activation to be able to see anything. So if there's like no photon hitting the retina, then all we see is black.
Yeah.
And that's where it's like, in our visual system being bound by photonic
reception.
It's not. It's like reception, but it's also identification of presence. Like the presence of photons is what activates our visual system, and it's like it's that specific mechanism that allows us to see anything at all, and that's kind of, I think, what you're alluding to in our visual system being bound by light. It's like we can only see anything if photons are actually stimulating our visual receptors. Otherwise, we can't see anything. Yeah. You can have working eyes, but until a photon at least a single photon, which is usually way more. But until the photon starts stimulating your visual receptors, you can't see anything.
Like the
So
reason
we are bound by light.
the reason that gravity would affect our vision is that it affects the rate that light travels, and it affects our perception of time, because it's all intrinsically linked. They're all very, very tightly bound to each other. On some levels, even magnetism will mess with us, because it can affect the environment that we exist in and the ionic charge of like the atmosphere on our planet, or on the magnetic field in the way of our sensors, and those things will have an impact on the way that we see things. It's pretty crazy to me, actually. The like we're so close to being able to see further than ever before, and they're doing it with just the most incredible technology. And the more I read about it, the more I realize, why would we ever send somebody into space? Like, apparently our blood starts like destroying itself when we're in space. We can't even stay.
Because we have to colonize. That's why. That there's a desire to colonize in space, and I think that's driving the reason for human presence, beyond.
Well, I mean, historically, hasn't colonization occurred because either they needed more resources or they needed more space to house people?
I mean, that's where we get, plot points in movies like Don't Look Up, which, has, a super valuable comet flying towards Earth, and they choose not to divert it from its current path and instead try to harvest it. That's where we also get articles that we see in certain news outlets about the value of certain asteroids. This asteroid has so many certain precious metals on it, and it's worth this many trillions of dollars.
Yeah, but you remember what happened when the Japanese tried to harpoon an asteroid, right? It just bounced off of it.
Yeah.
Like, they tried to land on the thing, and they ended up like tilting over and getting stuck until the asteroid swung around the sun until that side of it was facing the sun, so the thing can get electricity again. Like, we're not landing on an orbiting rock, a rock orbiting the sun at high velocities and mining it.
So absurd. And the only reason people even thought that was possible is because of that fucking movie. And then all the tech bros started grifting on it and started creating these asteroid mining operations, of which none of them have done anything of value.
Yep.
I think it was like 1 gram maybe was recovered, and it took like $100 million to recover a gram from an asteroid, which is like, not.
And because of the what we call the radiometric decay of the material, they determined that it was from some extremely early portion of the solar system, when the planetary accretion disk was still in its infancy. Like, this stuff got kind of shoved out, and because it got shoved out, that means it didn't have anything heavy enough to hold it in, so it's not really worth anything. Lo and behold, most of the rocks out in the middle of nowhere are worth like nothing. Like, they weren't even compressed enough into becoming something useful.
The idea of us having to start looking off planet for valuable things to use is fucking absurd. It's really weird. It's really crazy that we have this cultural notion. Oh, we did it all. Figured it all out here. We've tapped all the resources to the point now we got to start looking fucking space resources.
I mean,
look at all these people. We don't have enough for all these people. We need space rocks.
Well, we need space rocks to run the orbital power systems so everyone can drive their Teslas.
Well, it's unfortunate because the people who are really driving the industrial side of these types of reclamation projects pretend to really care about the global population, but it's really all about maintaining their industrial monopoly, and trying to be first to some new resource.
I mean, Elon said that he'd pay for whatever initiative if he could see like where the money was going, but nobody can figure out where the money's going because it costs too much to do that kind of math, apparently. Well, the UN said they could do it for like $1 billion or something dumb, $6 billion. Could end poverty.
Yeah, he was never going to give any money
Of course
away.
not.
Yeah, and that's where, again, it's like his little fanboys. Elon would save the world if he could, but people are blocking him. It's government, bureaucracy, and red tape. And it's like, dude couldn't even do a hyperloop. We got Teslas in a tunnel. None of the things that he promised has he delivered on.
Oh yeah, $6 billion.
None of the things. Teslas are being recalled. Hyperloop doesn't remotely work. Fucking SpaceX is like a big government subsidy, basically. It's like, yeah, he could do that with government money, of course. Yeah.
He can't end world hunger for a decade by spending 0.02% of his net worth. he could end it for a decade. No, sorry, 2%. For 2% of his wealth, he could end world hunger for a decade. I think that we could forgive him for wasting so many resources, sending dumb shit into space, like a car. If he would end world hunger for a decade.
Right. Yeah.
All those carbon credits that he's selling, we'll forget about all that shit because his Tesla doesn't produce any carbon. They're a carbon-free car company. They don't need carbon emissions. That's the biggest grift. That's just dirty. And then it allows companies like Stellantis to sell cars in America that fail to meet emissions standards. Way to go. It's almost like, our system is set up with, it's pretty clever, that we've got a lot of things that say you can't do this, you can't do that, but you can if you do these things. It takes a lot of foresight to build that into a system.
Which all of it's not just nonsensical bureaucracy, but some of it is, obviously. And that's where, when you have people making rules that don't know what they're talking about, that's when you get nonsensical bureaucracy. But everything is not that. And it takes education to know the difference. And people want to pretend they can just look at something and tell, nope, this is a scam. This is a scam. Yep. I know it. And even, the way this gets back to the way Joe Rogan was debunking the doctor, quote, air quotes, heavy air quotes. It's like anything that people don't want to acknowledge as being an opposing perspective, they can just Google something that says it, because private sectors are not bound by truth in America in the same way they are in other countries. And as long as you can talk around the truth, you don't have to tell the truth, which is why Elizabeth Holmes got away with what she got away with for 9 years. So Elizabeth Holmes actually getting convicted is monumental in that it draws a line in the sand as to where you can lie in the private sector. And I think Joe Rogan is at the tail end of that grift of being able to exploit that line. He's selling his on it brain drugs, and now probably got a bunch of ivermectin stock that he was pushing on his show. There is no way in hell that Joe Rogan is doing what he's doing without having some monetary incentive. Because as I stated earlier, when you have a fucking free vaccine available, to then have somebody like Rogan pushing these fucking private solutions, basically. These are drugs that were basically things you could purchase off the shelf for certain things. Like the whole reason you could get a prescription for ivermectin, but if you purchase it for the horse, that's where you could just go buy it. So that's kind of where the reason they were talking about horse paste is because you'd have to get a prescription to get the human doses, but you could just go buy it for horses in some places. And that's why they're like, oh, people buying horse paste. Well, there's human doses of ivermectin and there's horse doses. And when people think that they can get better by having ivermectin, they'll fucking go start hoarding ivermectin, like the way they're hoarding tests and the way they're hoarding masks and the way they're hoarding hand sanitizer. Because in a culture of hoarding and reselling, people think that they can, it's just like a natural reaction. Oh, this thing is valuable. I'm going to buy a bunch of it and potentially make my cost by reselling the extra that I purchased. And if I don't sell them, it's no big deal. I'll just take the loss. I'll just sit on it. It's no, there's no sweat off my back. It's just a little investment. No big deal. And you hear people doing this shit with everything, whether it's Bitcoin or fucking ivermectin, man. And that's where.
Well, Florida can apparently afford to sit on 1 million rapid tests and let them expire.
Yeah. Yep. Because they wanted to either flip them or take they'll take the loss. It's no big deal.
They'll
It's
just
a
write
little
it off.
investment. We'll write it off.
Write it off. It means they can spend more money somewhere else.
Guess what? That's why I was like, hey, you were sick. Good luck finding a test. You're not going to be able to find a test because people are hoarding them.
Yep. Well, fortunately, it was just because I was crawling around in a dusty crawl space and my mask seal failed and I inhaled some dust from under my house, where I have literally, I can be confident in saying I am the only person that's been under there in the last 5 years. Nobody else has been underneath the house except for me. So if I was able to breathe in anything other than the dust and dirt, it's something that I left down there or brought down there with me.
You have goggles?
I had, my eyes were fine. And it was just, when I blow my nose, I can still see chunks of dirt. It's like, man, how long was I breathing with so heavily with that failed face mask? Fuck. I mean, I knew something was wrong when I came out and everything tasted kind of like wood. Like a piece of pine or a 2x4 tasted like a baseball bat. And then the next day I really couldn't taste anything. Everything smelled like dirt. And today nothing smells like dirt. Finally got most of that out. I probably also need to change the filter on my circulatory system here in the house. This is a casual reminder to anybody who's listening. It might be a good time to check your furnace filters. They're cheap and it doesn't hurt to change them. You don't have to wait till they're full of crap to change your filters.
Crazy how much dust gets in the air. Obviously you're crawling around under the house, but man, I have to stay on top of the dust. And that's what I'm just like, I don't think a lot of people in their own living situations are containing the dust. And I bet there's no way the anti-maskers dust their homes. No fucking way.
So I run I have an air ionizer in the sunroom that I use periodically. It's an air filtration ionizing system. And I have an identical one that's in the utility room that's running 24/7. And it's to keep dust down. And then we have a rather large air ionizer that can also generate ozone and uses UV filtration or UV and multi-stage HEPA filtration, all that stuff. And I run that whenever it's pretty bad. And I can just, turn it on, and a few minutes later, you just watch particulates in the air just fall to the floor, and you vacuum them up because they're all magnetized now. It's pretty cool. I can't keep up. It's impossible to keep up. I also have a 90-something-year-old house, and it's got dust in it. But yeah, no, I don't think unless you start with a brand new building that never had anything in it, there's no way to get everything out. Especially not if you use it, if you walk in and out of a space.
Yeah. That's just gonna happen.
One thing I've been casually looking into is they make these adapters that fit on the end of hoses that you would attach to like an air compressor. And what it is, it's like a hydra of silicone tubes that have little nozzles on the end that just blow air around. So you push these through ventilation systems, and it like just knocks out any caked on dust or debris, just knocks that out. And when you set it in, you feed it in with like a vacuum hose to pull anything out that gets knocked loose. I think I need to get something like this because there's no way that I can clean out the ancient ass vents in this house. There's just no way. But then, of course, I've got to vacuum out, decades of vent dust. Because I'm not convinced that it's all getting blown out by the furnace. It's just some of it's just getting moved down the tube a little bit further.
I wouldn't doubt it, man. The bigger the space, the more difficult it is to get rid of the fucking dust. That shit is, whew.
Well, not to mention, in my crawl space, there is plastic, but, plastic is just sitting on top of dirt. So there's a lot of dirt dust down there, not just like human hair and skin dust. I'd actually worry more about the anti-maskers not vacuuming and taking care of their human hair and skin dust problem than I am about my dirt under the floor, under the plastic layer dust problems.
They don't do that either. I'm sure they don't do that either. And that's where, I'm not saying every anti-masker and anti-vaxxer is a hoarder, but that's how I imagine them living. Just if they're not a hoarder, they're on the cusp of hoarding. They don't live in clean homes. There's no fucking way. Probably, haven't vacuum. They might not even own vacuums. And if they do, it's probably broken. There's no way these are clean people.
They've never mopped.
They probably hoard broken vacuums specifically.
They hoard the dust inside of broken vacuums.
Man, there's a house that I've driven by every so often on my way to one of the many merchants on the west side that I frequent. And every time I go by, it's like there's a new pile of stuffed to the brim trash bags, like just sitting on the side of their garage. And some weeks it's really tall, like 5 or 6 tall, the entire length of this garage. And then sometimes it's only 1 or 2. How the hell does anyone produce that much? How can anyone fill that many trash bags? I don't get it. Maybe they must run a cleaning company. But as you said, why are they hoarding so much debris? I think hoarding is one of those great mysteries of our era. Like it's the disease of consumerism gone too far. You can't discourage it. Like though.
It's an attempt at controlling one's own mortality by like putting off, either throwing off stuff or fixing it. It makes it feel like you have another day. Every accumulated item is another day of existence because you have to put off fixing it or throwing it out.
But that's like one more task to get in the way of freedom.
Yeah, but when you're scared of death, you're going to rationalize keeping that trinket that doesn't work anymore because you'll fix it. You'll just fix it tomorrow. I got too many things to do today, but tomorrow, well, you might not even be here tomorrow, but that's why the people keep it, so they can trick themselves. As far as I can tell.
Exceptional Radio.
Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random. Exceptional Radio.
Wicked, jungle is massive. Wicked, wicked.